this year sees the release of two new consoles: PlayStation Vita, Sony's successor to the PSP, which has already been released, and Nintendo's Wii U, slated for release sometime near the end of the year. There's been a healthy dose of skepticism for both systems, but is this skepticism legit, or is it just a lot of baseless speculation? What do Sony and Nintendo have in store for us with the new systems? Do you think that Nintendo getting a jump start on the 8th generation of consoles will force Sony and Microsoft to think about successors to the PS3 and 360? Find out our thoughts right here on Downloadable Content. Welcome everyone once again to this edition of Downloadable Content. I am Brian, and with me we have a little bit of a smaller panel this time. We have Ron.
Hello everyone.
And we have Ben. Welcome back.
Thank you very much. Good to be back.
Not quite a prolonged absence this time around.
Short vacation.
A short, yes.
Yeah.
He went on, he took a sabbatical.
It was a nice hiatus. I needed to relax a little bit.
Enjoy the sun, get out there, weather.
Yeah. Well, listen, Boston and Florida, what can I say? Spring training baseball is a lot of fun.
I'll bet.
Yeah. Sun, it's that thing most gamers aren't, we're not as familiar with as we should be.
What is
allergic to sometimes.
What is this angry ball in the sky?
And why does it burn us?
Help, it hurts. It hurts. But yeah, so we're going to be talking about the Wii U and the Vita on this episode. As I said, one of the systems has already been released. The other is still being developed and is the subject of wild speculation, ranging from it's going to be the best system ever to oh hell, the end of the world is here. So we'll get in a bit of that. Before we get into discussion, just want to say that if you have any comments, questions, whatever feedback, you can get in touch with us at facebook.com/downloadablecontent, or you can follow us on Twitter at DLContent. So we're just going to dive right into the discussion. We're going to start off with the PlayStation Vita, as it was just released. It was released less than a month ago in the USA. It came out February 22nd. Sony decided it would come out in two flavors, one with 3G and one Wi-Fi only. One with the 3G costing about $300. The one without is $250. I don't understand why Sony would put out two versions of the same system instead of just making just one console, that could do both.
Somebody probably very accurately described Sony's approach to portable gaming as just throw any technology we can think of into the thing and hope that makes it resonate with more people. Don't actually hone any specific parts of it, just throw in everything but the kitchen sink.
It also depends too on people who may have a larger financial budget or want to support their gaming hobby more. They may want to do the idea of that transferring and cross-platform stuff, playing and be able to play on the go, because I don't know if you've seen the commercials for it, but Sony's heavily advertising the cross-platform aspect of the Vita.
Of course they are.
Why wouldn't they?
Of course they are. I mean, I just don't understand why they put out two separate versions of the same, of the console. I mean, couldn't you just make a one version where you can, if you don't want to use the 3G, then just don't use it. But
I mean, I think maybe part of it was to sort of drive down costs for people who wouldn't necessarily use that feature. I mean, there is the price difference there. The 3G radio does cost them money. It costs, obviously, that costs get passed on to the end user. And again, that seems to sort of be the thing nowadays is, people want their systems or devices to have some level of online connectivity, and here's a nice little extra something they can give to people who either can or choose to afford it.
Fair enough.
Don't get me wrong, I don't think it was a good idea. I'm just maybe trying to defend why they would do something like that.
That's fine. I mean, if it was me, I mean, I would just, go for the Wi-Fi only. That I'm content with that. Then again,
I imagine most gamers are content with the Wi-Fi only as well.
I mean, then again, I don't own a smartphone or anything like that, so.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little different. I mean, I do own a smartphone. I would probably go for the Wi-Fi only model, but I can certainly understand the appeal of a 3G enabled device, other than just my phone, especially if I didn't have my smartphone. But it's not, I think it's more for like portable gaming, so you can just play against your friends anywhere you are, and I can certainly appreciate that, but I don't necessarily know how intelligent of it, well, not intelligent, how practical an idea it really ends up being.
I don't know if this was true or not, but if you get the 3G version, does that, I assume that you would have to purchase some manner of data plan?
Yeah, I would not think that they're necessarily giving you all of that data for free.
I would imagine it's similar to a contract phone where you sign for a couple years or something like that. I don't know if AT&T does this. I know for all their carrier plans they have a dedicated like data only plan for people where it's like $30 or $40 a month for their data plan. I imagine AT&T has something similar to that, where you pay $30 or $40 a month to use their 3G network.
See, if anything, I wouldn't think that would be contract based. I mean, it's the real one of the reasons why companies lock you in with a contract is, you're paying they're paying a subsidy on a device, and they want to make sure that they're going to recoup their money. So that's part of why they lock you into the 2-year deal. With something like the Vita, AT&T or whoever the carrier isn't going to be paying for any portion of the device, so I wouldn't know that it's necessarily contract based, but I'm sure that they have different plans, different options for how much data you want to use.
They do, actually. I'm looking at an article right now from Destructoid. It's through AT&T, and their 3G data plans, they have 3 flavors: a 250 megabyte plan for $15 a month, a 2 gigabyte plan for $25, and a 3 gigabyte plan for $30.
So that's in line with, I think, their standard plans for most smartphones and tablets and things like that. The interesting thing about that, with them not really shifting pricing models, is you don't know if it uses comparatively more or less data for certain things. You would imagine gaming would probably be an option that uses a lot of data, as it's probably a lot of information back and forth, but something like if they use a web browser or if they have YouTube or some other video watching service, that would also take up a lot of data, and depending on compression and video quality and things like that, that could really affect how much people actually need on a month-to-month basis.
That's true, and it seems like the pricing is not bad, but there are people who can afford it, and more power to them. Moving on, the Vita no longer uses the UMD format that the PSP uses. I get the impression that, that was Sony's format. I get the impression that the UMD never really caught on as, a long-lasting data format.
Yeah, I think the part of the reason for that was because of the storage capabilities for it. Because in comparison to technology similar to that time, it was comparable, but almost immediately afterwards, you had the proliferation of USB drives and flash drives.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I certainly don't know, but were there any other devices aside from a PSP that could even play UMD discs?
Nothing that I'm aware of. I feel like it's only the PSP. And I think, if we're being honest, I think Sony really sort of acknowledged that the UMD was a failure a couple of years ago with the release of the PSP Go. I mean, what better way to kind of quietly kill off your own proprietary format than release a revised version of the one system that supported it that doesn't have support for it any longer. It's really, I agree with you. I never really saw it taking off. It just never really, I guess, caught on with anybody.
And I'm confirming that now, that the only device that used UMD was the PSP. So
yeah, I think the only way you could use it otherwise was to buy some sort of third-party thing and take the disc out of the little case and maybe stick it in your computer that way.
Yeah, and even then, it looks like this was pretty much, it was proprietary, and that was the end of it. Kind of like GameCube discs, or.
Although I'm a little disappointed, just very slightly, that they no longer use the UMD disc, which means that the Vita is not backwards compatible, unless you buy PSP titles from the PlayStation Network.
I would imagine that they have to release a peripheral device that, if for nothing else, allows them to copy the data off the disc and put it onto a single storage blink.
I don't see Sony doing that.
Well, I don't think they will either. But if they wanted to make more money, they would let people do that.
I mean, again, though, I feel like I'm going to agree with Brian on this one. I don't know that such a peripheral is ever going to exist. And again, the PSP Go was the first step towards the UMD's death, and the outright abandonment of it on the PS Vita. I think really just they don't want to necessarily, if they'd wanted to continue supporting the format in any shape, they would have brought it in. They would have found a way to bring it into the PS Vita. I don't think they switched. When the PSP was first announced, I remember one of the expected criticisms was poor battery life, just because having to constantly support a disc-based format on a portable device was not expected to be necessarily power efficient. And while it's true that that's not the case with the PS Vita, they, from what I understand, really don't have phenomenal battery life either. But they still probably would have found a way to get it done. You expand the system thickness to have room for the disk drive and the extra battery and all of that jazz. I don't think this was just a cut it just for size and battery life. I think they really saw that they were not turning a profit with these. They were not moving UMD units. And while it's true that they're going to certainly piss off fans by not having support for it, I think the UMD is dead. I don't see them dragging it back from the dead anytime soon, and certainly no third party is going to be in any rush to put out such a peripheral. So I would tend to agree with Brian on this one. I don't think we're going to see any more UMDs.
Yeah. So in its replacement, they now use proprietary PS Vita game cards, which kind of look like an SD card. And as memory, they have proprietary special PS Vita memory cards. It's one of the things that I'm not too thrilled with Sony about. I mean, I don't really like proprietary everything. Just as an aside, digital cameras, most digital cameras take SD cards, but then if you buy a Sony product and they're like, no, we're not going to do what everyone else does. We're going to force you to buy our own proprietary memory sticks.
I mean, I think it was the only time I can really think of Sony supporting anything as a mainstream standard rather than their own proprietary anything was on the original PS3 models. You could put in a standard laptop hard drive. They've always done this. They always,
yes.
You say the UMD card, the PlayStation Vita cards look like flash cards. That's all they are. They're going to just be flash cards in a specialized shape with maybe some special hardware circuit locking them to their device. Same thing with the memory cards. They're just standard flash cards that are just in a specialized shape and maybe have a specialized piece of hardware to them, locking them into the system and doing nothing else. It's not about data compression. It's not about anything. It's literally just about Sony finding ways to lock you into their system so that they can make a little more money. Yeah, it's another form. It's a physical DRM, if you will. It's just another way for them to lock you into their system so that third parties can't necessarily make this money, that they just keep the money kind of going in the ecosystem. And I mean, good for them. They're certainly allowed to make money and want to make money, but it doesn't mean it's not. It doesn't mean it's not frustrating for the end user, but I mean, the option is don't buy Sony stuff. You know, and that's literally what else is your other option? Does Microsoft have a gaming platform? No. Does Nintendo's gaming platform require memory cards? No. You know, I mean, it comes with the territory. This is what it is. We've gotten used to on home consoles having built-in storage, but I mean that also wasn't always the case. You know, memory cards for the N64 and for the PlayStation and for the PlayStation 2 were all just proprietary flash cards.
Yep.
I mean, this is unfortunately nothing new. You're right, though, but Sony has other businesses, and they extend this same practice everywhere.
That's very true. You know, we've spent the first part of this discussion, you know, sort of bashing Sony. Some of it rightfully deserved. You know, when I remember some of the advertising for the PS Vita, one of the things they noticed, especially at last year's E3, was this notion of transfarring. I really don't have a good grasp on what it is. I kind of get, from everything I've read about it, I get the sense that it's a way to basically take a save file from, say, your PS3, bring it to your portable, and be able to resume it from there.
It kind of sounds like that. Brian, this'll shed some light on you. Apparently the concept was designed by Hideo Kojima. So there you go. I hope that, you know, explains a few things.
Which means it's going to be very mysterious and
it means that only Metal Gear Solid, Zone of the Enders, and the Metal Gear Solid HD Collection are the games that confirm support for it as of the article that I'm reading, although who knows how out of date this is. Anyway, the idea is like you can theoretically play a game or, you know, transfer some information from a PSP to a PS3 or, you know, to a Vita.
Provided that that you have the same game on both systems, I would think.
Sure, of course.
I mean, for example, if you have, say, Metal Gear Solid 4 on the PS3 and Metal Gear Solid 4 on your Vita, you know, I would assume that's the only way it would work, since the game exists on both platforms.
I would assume so, yeah.
But as far as I can tell, there, you know, aside from Kojima's projects, not too many games support it.
It just sounds like some sort of cloud storage gaming, basically.
It does. It sounds a bit like that, actually. But, you know, again, if it's just Kojima's games that are being supported by this, that means that at the end of it, you're going to have a huge plot twist. You know,
yeah, of course. At the end, there will be a giant red exclamation point that shows up when you've completed the transfer.
Yes.
Or the transfar.
Yeah, after you've completed the process, I found the disc, but they're all dead.
Yeah, exactly.
They've all been dead for 100 years, and you'll just look at your system like, what?
I mean, according to this, Kojima's idea was that you'd be able to play the game wherever you go, and that's not a bad idea.
No.
Buy the portable and the home version of the same game, that you should be able to continue playing them. But, I mean, therein lies the rub. How many people that you know are going to buy both the portable and home console version of the same game? For those that can and those that do, sure, it makes plenty of sense. You know, if you're going to be playing, MLB 12, the show, at home, and then you have to go somewhere, and you're going to be sitting on the train for an hour, and you want to play. Of course, that's the idea is, well, this is the game that's on your mind. Let's take it out and keep playing. But I mean, I feel like it's one of those things where Sony dreams in high technology, and then the reality is far less practical, especially for the end user who is already paying for, proprietary memory cards and, a proprietary storage format for their games and all these other things. It just becomes one more thing of, we can do this, we have the tech, it's built in, it's just a question of cost and cost to the user and where does it become practical.
Yeah, that's, it sounds like, at the start, quite a bit of an investment of not just, time, but money. The system by itself is, $250 if you get the Wi-Fi version. Not to mention getting memory cards and the cost of the games and
this assumes you have a PS3 already.
Yes.
And if you don't have one of those, then that's another, $250. I mean, that's what I'm saying. It can very quickly add up. The idea is if you already have the PS3 and you're already planning on getting the PS Vita, then you're still just looking at the cost of the memory card plus the games for each system, which could be what, $60 for the PS3 version and 40, 50 for the Vita. I literally don't know what Vita games go for.
I think they're 40. I could be wrong. So you're talking about 350 essentially.
And I suspect that for that it pushes not the system and its games and whatnot into the realm of unaffordability for a lot. I mean, to this point, it's only been a month. I don't know how many units of the Vita have been sold to this point.
I don't know. I wouldn't necessarily think. Sony had a recent something where they had the opportunity to extol how many units they sold, and all they said was that they were very happy with it. So I wouldn't necessarily think that that's a phenomenal sign if they won't actually give out numbers. I'm on the page of a certain well-known video game retailer, and the prices for Vita games as new look like they go from about the $20 range. The high end seems to be actually $50 for one game.
Damn.
For a Vita game.
I'm going to guess Uncharted.
That would be correct. What's interesting to me is, we used to have, I remember Game Boy Advance and even DS games a little bit would top out at a certain point. Nintendo would kind of put the ceiling on that, and Sony, I feel like, for the most part, did too. And then every once in a while, you'd see a special release or something that was maybe like $5 over it. So if every other game is $29.99, this one would be $34. And now with this, they're, $50 for a portable game. I understand part of it's psychological. They want you to feel like you're getting a PlayStation 3 that fits in your pocket. But, there does come a cost. There does become a mentality of, am I really willing to spend this much money on what is essentially a shrunken down version of the same experience I could get on my big screen TV at home?
And also keep in mind, too, that I think part of these numbers are also because the lineup is still so fresh. I mean, what's on the Vita that someone might want? Marvel vs. Capcom and Uncharted. And we already have those games.
It was kind of like how the 3DS stumbled out of the gate with, ports. You didn't have any, really fresh, new ideas. It was just a lot of ports. Ocarina of Time being a big one. That's just, how it is. And, taking a look now at some of the launch titles that came out for the Vita, as you mentioned, Marvel vs. Capcom, which is already out on the PS3. I could see Rayman Origins being a little bit of a seller there.
That's multi-platform, though, so...
Yeah.
This is sort of the problem with judging something so close to the beginning of its launch, is that, unless you have... With I think portables are kind of in a little bit of an odder place because, especially with new home consoles, it tends to be more it's more of a gap usually from system to system, whereas the idea what Sony was going for with the Vita was, like they said, a PlayStation 3 in your pocket. Well, that's great, but we've already all had the PlayStation 3 for the last 5.5 years. So selling us the same games or similar games on a new console that we've already played on a console for the last 5.5 years, that's not going to get me as excited. It's, ooh, I can take Uncharted with me. Okay, cool. Knowing me, I'll probably still end up playing it mostly on my couch because I don't necessarily want to take it out of the house right away because it's a new product. I don't want to break it. I don't want to, lose it somewhere.
Or get it stolen.
Or have it be stolen because it's so new and so sought after. It's kind of an interesting, kind of a rough spot for them to be put in. It doesn't sound like anything amazing or individual is in the launch lineup, so that's the challenge. Do you set new games that are totally original IPs or original ideas and risk them failing? Or do you, try and just copy the same stuff that's already been done and hope that people will pay for a second or third copy? Some of it's going to work with things like that transferring feature, but some of it's going to literally just be the same game and a different screen size, and you have to wonder how many people are willing to pay for it a second or third time.
I would think that if you're going to at least try with a new IP. I mean, if you're releasing the same games but on a different system, I personally don't see what the appeal there, with the exception of a few huge titles. I mean, for example, the 3DS. I mean, Ocarina of Time was a huge seller for the 3DS, even though it's essentially the same game as its N64 counterpart. I think that, if you're going to be doing re-releases of already existing games, unless it was a massive seller originally, I don't think that you're going to get, too much success when you're re-releasing the same game but on a different platform.
But I mean, again, that's almost that's almost the really big risk that you take. If you release a new game, a new IP at the launch of a platform, you're really taking a big risk there, because that's going to be a game, realistically, most games have probably about a month lifespan on the shelves of the retailers before they're kind of relegated, away for the next big thing. Most games. If you have a game that comes out that's a launch title for a system, and nobody really buys it, partially because the system's not really selling a lot of units, well, that's a big problem for that developer. They may not want to revisit that franchise because they think all of a sudden, well, nobody's really that interested with it. Not to mention, it could be looked at as, it's this tiny little indie title that nobody remembers. If the system doesn't have a great launch and has a negative connotation for a while, that title, even if it's a very good game, could have the same kind of negative connotations. We always hear about this is the best game that nobody's ever played. Well, they're usually just that. Being posted somewhere as somebody's best game that nobody else ever played gets a game a little bit of recognition, but they really, like I said, they have that month window. If they have to make an impact there. So that's certainly something where I can understand why a developer would say, let's just do something that people are familiar with. Let's do something we've done before, even if it's a re-release, even if it's whatever. We'll get a little bit of flack in the press, but in the end we'll still sell 1 million copies, or we'll still be able to move some units, and that'll give us the freedom and the resources to be able to actually produce an original product. So I mean, again, it's I totally, I agree with you. Nintendo releasing Ocarina of Time for the 5th time, they know they're going to continue selling that every single time they put it out, and they're still going to get a little bit of flack for it, but it'll still sell millions of copies. The problem with new IPs just at the beginning of the launch system, it's the double-edged sword. There is no right answer.
Yep.
If you re-release the game, you get flack for what, they couldn't come up with anything original. If you release something original, you're going to end up at the bottom of a bargain bin as this great title that nobody ever gets to play.
I mean, that's sort of why I personally think that the Uncharted release was actually a good thing for Sony, because this is an established franchise, but it's a prequel. So, I mean, in a way, we know the character lives, so nothing that happens in the game really will matter, but it at least has that investment into it. So, people are still pretty fresh off the heels of Uncharted 3, and they might have their Nathan Drake fix, or maybe they still want more. Well, get the Vita. You can see the prequel. You can see where it came from. So, I'm wondering maybe if the established franchise might have a little bit better offering, where if they could have the next installment, or even a prequel or a side story.
I mean, I would agree. I think that it's a good idea to have. I mean, there's a reason we have a Nintendo, a Mario game, and a Zelda game, and a Metroid game on every single Nintendo franchise, on every single console. They will sell.
Yep.
I just don't think that re-releasing the same game is necessarily going to be the right course. If they have the opportunity to release a new title in the franchise, even if it is a side story or a prequel or something like that, I'd much rather see that. And they're tapping in a little bit to the brand name recognition of their original characters, but at least then it's still a safe bet, but that's probably going to be their best way to actually move units.
Fair enough. Look, I mean, and we all know that usually launch titles for any system are not usually the best titles. Usually it takes a while for a system, be it a major console or a handheld, to hit its stride. It doesn't usually zoom out of the gate sprinting with tons of popularity. I mean, it's rare that we see something like that. But looking at some of the upcoming releases for the Vita, there are some definite, possibilities there. I mean, we have a new Silent Hill game in development. We have, obviously there's going to be a couple of other re-releases. There's going to be a Little Big Planet released for it. We have, several HD collections coming out. Zone of the Enders. Metal Gear. I didn't see that. Metal Gear Solid, the HD collection, is getting an eventual PS Vita release.
Yep, although I think it's a downscaled version somehow.
I'm taking a look here. I mean, it's going to take a while, like anything else, for the system to hit its stride. I mean, look at how long it took, really, the PS3 and the 360 to hit its stride. I mean, we're experiencing that now.
Yeah, I mean, how many... I remember reading, what was that game? Cameo, Elements of Power, I think, or whatever that game was that Rare released right at the 360's launch. The response was, well, it feels like an N64 game. Well, it had been an N64 game at one point. That's one of the problems with launch titles, is a lot of times they will take a title that's deep in development for the previous generation of systems and then just adjust it to be ready for the new generation. That's another reason why we don't, immediately see things that blow us away, is because they don't have the opportunity to kind of, explore what the system is really capable of doing. Here's a Katamari Damacy game, of course, that's going to come out for the Vita. Mortal Kombat.
Call of Duty.
Call of Duty, of course.
There's some game coming out, too. It could be for the PS3. I might be mistaken, but it's some sort of game involving gravity.
I have no idea what game that would be. I believe you. I have no idea what game that is.
I mean,
they mentioned it in the latest Game Informer. So,
okay.
MLB 12, the show, is going to get a Vita release.
I think that's already out. And then I was just reading it
just came out.
Yeah, you can do cross-platform saves. They're selling them together. They sell the PS3 and PS Vita versions in one bundle. I guess to try and coax people into buying the two of them right there to kind of work with the cross-platform.
And how much is that bundle?
It's actually so individually the MLB for PlayStation 3 is $59 or $60. For Vita, it's normally $40. So the two of them would be $100, but they sell it for $80 for the combination of the two. So it's a little bit of a discount.
That's a little bit of discount, yeah. I mean, if I had a Vita, I would probably, and as a baseball fan, I would probably pick up the bundle just because of the fact that the cross-platform would be at least worthwhile for me, because I think a baseball game in MLB wouldn't take that long, I'd imagine. Maybe half hour. That's enough time for a train ride or something like that.
Well, the games can sometimes take longer than that, but I mean,
especially if Ben and I are playing, they're usually extra inning affairs.
Forever. They will go on forever. The thing that's exciting to me, though, about the idea behind cross-platform play is it really means that the developers have the opportunity, and then even more so the pressure on them, to kind of step up the portable version of the game. We were, again, questioning, this is the mentality of, am I willing to spend $50 on a portable game? Well, if the portable version is equal to or greater than the home console release, then sure, why not? It's break that mold, break that mentality. So if they're able to do...
portable version is not, really, you can't really make it like a throwaway title. You can't really put, less effort into it.
Not at that price, no. And aren't they talking about doing downloadable content, or, for Vita titles?
It wouldn't surprise me if they are. I mean, I don't know for certain.
I thought I'd read that somewhere. I mean, if that's the case, then so you have expansions and DLC for, a portable console. That's also, an interesting concept right there. Of course, there could be downsides to that, certainly, but, the idea of patches and things like that for portable gaming is not really a bad thing by any stretch of the imagination.
No, I think that's a positive. I mean, and looking at the list of Vita games, I mean, there's a lot more games using that whole transferring function than I originally thought. I mean, there are quite a few of these games on this list. I don't know if you're looking at the same list I am, but there's a lot of games that will support that transfer feature. So I think Sony is going to really try to push this.
Sure, why wouldn't they?
And if it works, I think it'd be a great thing. I mean,
I really think if they want to push it, Sony may have to offer some sort of discount for people who want to buy the Vita version or the PS3 version.
I think so. I mean, Ben just mentioned it with the MLB The Show. You get a bit of a discount if you buy them both together, as opposed to separately. I mean, if you have both systems.
Yeah, I mean, like I really think they have to do that because otherwise you're not going to get the most out of it. I mean, personally, like if I had a Vita, like I said, for the MLB The Show, I would do it. But like if it was for Final Fantasy or something like that, I would spend an extra $20 just to be able to play both games whenever I wanted to, essentially.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. You know that Square Enix has announced that they are releasing Final Fantasy X in high def for both the PlayStation 3 and the Vita.
Of all the games they would choose to remake, why 10?
Well,
Why?
it's not a remake. It's not a remake. It's a re-release. It's just an upscale. It sounds like it's just an upscaling the same way they did, like the Metal Gear Solid or the God of War HD collections. That's just what it sounds like. I don't have all the information in front of me, but there's an idea. I mean, if you have both games, you can literally. That's a perfect example. There's not many titles that are going to be better than an RPG to be able to say, okay, I'm done playing at home. Let me go on the road and transfer your save files and transfer everything and just pick stuff up right there. A sports title, might be difficult to transfer in the middle of a game. A lot of other games, depending on all the other information you'd have, if you can really fit the whole version of the game on there, you don't need support for extra modes, you don't need support for anything else. You just basically need the portable version to have the main game and all the features on the main game, and there you go. You can take it on the go or play when you're back at home. And like you said, it's a like we talked about earlier, it's a well-known franchise. It's a well-established title. They know it's going to sell a lot of copies on the individual platforms. There will probably be some kind of bundled release for the two of them to drop the price down. It would not surprise me at all to see that be another $50 title. So if they're going to release the two of them again, at $80 or whatever they're going to do for the two versions, that would be something that I'm sure that will sell a lot of copies.
I think so, and I think that at this point, I mean, it's only been out a month, so it's really too early to tell if the Vita is dead in the water or anything. I think that like anything else, it needs time. It needs time.
Yeah, I didn't mean to imply that I think it's dead in the water or anything like that. I think it's certainly coming into its own, but I mean, just the early criticisms, I don't think it's necessarily something that I have any plans on picking up. It's just doesn't seem like my cup of tea.
Well, I mean, the way I buy video game consoles is that I wait until I feel that there's a sufficient library of games for me to justify getting the system. That's, it took me this long to finally actually want an Xbox 360 because I felt that, for me there was, enough of a library, mostly of exclusive titles that, allowed me to feel that I was justified to get the system. I feel no different about the PSP. I feel the same way for the 3DS. Once I think that there's enough of a library of interesting games to me, then I'll get it.
Yeah, of course. Makes plenty of sense. There's why jump on the bandwagon and pay for something when you're just going to have it sit there and gather dust for a while.
Alrighty. Any final thoughts on the Vita before we cut to break? I take it not. All right.
Don't everybody jump up at once.
Your silence says that we are done with this part of the podcast. So when we come back, we will talk about Nintendo's Wii U and the various wild speculation that's following that. But for now, you have some music, and we'll play something. So you are listening to Downloadable Content. We will be back. Welcome back to the second half of downloadable content, talking about the Wii U and the Vita. Ben and Ron are still here. They haven't left. They haven't transferred to another device anywhere. It's
I thought it was transferring, not transferring.
oh yes. So change the vowel. Ooh.
Ooh.
Devil. Okay. So I spent the first half talking about the Vita. That's already been released. Now we're going to be talking about Nintendo's Wii U. And since Joshy's not here, I'll provide it. Wii U!
Thank you for that.
Nintendo's Wii U was officially unveiled at last year's E3. And I kind of get the sense that when it was unveiled, people just kind of looked at it like, what the fuck? Apparently there was some initial fear. Nintendo stock took a bit of a plummet.
What I thought was particularly interesting was we heard all of these details, weeks before, a couple of weeks before it was actually unveiled, and a lot of their general response was, "Well, that's crazy. There's no way they could actually cram all that technology into something and still make it affordable." And then they turn around and pretty much every single rumor was 100% accurate.
And it's just like 2 languages in one head. No one can live at that speed.
And yet here we are.
And here we are. It is slated to be... we don't have a definite release date, but according to all of the Nintendo bigwigs, it will be released at some point this year, at least in time for the holiday season. So sometime late this year. I suspect we're going to be receiving final details about it at this year's E3. One of the pluses, and all of us have been spoiled rotten, I feel, by backwards compatibility. And when we found out that the PS3 wasn't going to be fully backwards compatible, there was a bit of consternation and uproar, I seem to remember.
I think that was a little different though, because they first put it in and then slowly took it out while telling people that they were not going to take it out.
Yes, that Sony did an about face there. Yes. It's going to be backwards compatible with all Wii games and peripherals.
In fact, the Wiimote, I think, is expected to be aside from the new controller, the Wiimote, since they said, I think that they said they were only expecting really currently use of one of the tablet controllers at a time on the Wii U, so the Wii Remote is kind of expected to be the primary input in that sense, especially for multiplayer gaming.
Unfortunately, it means that I still can't get rid of my Wii, because that is my GameCube also. That plays my GameCube games.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of the same reason why I haven't gotten rid of my own PS2. I still have my entire PS1 library and PS2 library. Although I haven't really experimented yet popping in a PS1 game on the PS3. If I remember correctly, that's one of the ones that actually can handle that.
Yeah, PS1s can play on PS3, which is odd, but...
Yeah, I feel like they didn't take that out of any systems.
But in any event, it's going to be backwards compatible with all Wii games and peripherals, which is good. One of the big things I remember at the unveiling, one of the crux of it was their new controller, which looks like a tablet almost. And one of the biggest concerns about that was, okay, you're going to drive the price of this thing up with that controller.
Yep.
Because one of Nintendo's big things, they've always tried to make their consoles as affordable as possible. Continually, they have made, in each generation of consoles, theirs is usually the cheapest one.
Usually,
usually they're the cheapest option of the bunch. PS3 came out at $600, and Nintendo's like, well, oh yeah, Wii is going to be $250, so there. But we don't know what price yet on the Wii U, obviously. But this new tablet controller, one of the things I found most interesting about it is that it can become essentially the TV. You do not need to have the TV on to play on this system. You could have the system on and be playing the game from this tablet controller. Never mind the motion detection and how it's going to play the games. I just found that interesting.
Well, I mean, it's the same concept of like the transferring all over again, except this time they're providing. This time you don't have to buy 2 copies of the same game. You can just get away with buying one, and and that way you could sort of play, whether it's on the go. I mean, the idea there really was, I don't think so much for on the go gaming, but just so that they kind of they talk a lot about, Nintendo's talked a lot about making the Wii sort of, and then I guess by extension the Wii U, sort of the center of the family entertainment system as like a supplement to the regular television. And that's why I think you saw things like the Weather Channel and like the News Channel on the Wii. But I think they also recognize that not a lot of homes necessarily have multiple televisions, so they want to be able to provide an experience where you can continue to play even if somebody else needs the TV. This way it's not the gaming console getting relegated to whenever else the rest of the TV is free. It's whenever, you have the primary option of playing on the TV, or if that's not available, hey, you can play just on the system itself.
And I think the new tablet controller will have some of the similar functions that the 3DS has. Touch screen play, motion detection, sort of that old gyroscopic sort of thing. But yes, going back, one of the biggest concerns was, okay, how much have you jacked up the price of the system because of this controller? That's a very valid point.
Yeah, and then again, that's the other reason why maybe it's only compatible, with one of these special controllers. It may not even be a hardware limitation. They just may limit it by the software so that people aren't rushing out to try and buy second or third controllers, because then if they're out there, the developers will want to take advantage of that, and then that's going to very quickly raise the price of, the entry cost.
Yes. I mean, I can only imagine how much this might cost as a separate, Wiimotes by themselves cost $40 as it is.
And that's just for the remote. That doesn't even count the, the nunchuck.
Yeah, nunchuck or classic controller or what have you. Because it's essentially, a tablet. It's like a 6 or 7 inch screen.
Something like that, yeah. And it's not even, the rest of the system, you touched on this a little bit, but the rest of the system itself is pretty beefy hardware too. Yes. I'm just looking at that right now. Apparently the CPU is based... I'm reading this from the Wikipedia page, which they acknowledge could, the technical specifications are subject to change. But the CPU it's saying a multi-core processor based on the Power 7 architecture found in the Watson supercomputer, which, as we all remember, was, the competition on the computer that competed on Jeopardy. Yeah, this is gonna be some beefed up stuff. Yeah, it sounds like it's going to be a pretty... and that's the whole idea, is that they want to not necessarily be able to compete with the Xbox 360 and PS3. They want to surpass them. Yes. From what I understand. They want to crush them. Yes. They're for memory, they're going to have their usual internal memory, which can be expanded with SD cards and USB hard drives. Yeah, that's nice. That's very nice, because I think one of the biggest complaints about the Wii itself was just how small its internal memory was. You have PS3 and 360s with these gigantic internal hard drives, whereas the Wii has just an internal memory of 512 megabytes. Yeah, that's not really a whole lot of space for much in there. Yeah, it's not a lot of space for anything. There are countless times where I have to delete downloaded games from the Wii to make room for incoming save files or things like that. Luckily, one of the positives about the Wii Virtual Console is that any game you've purchased, you can download again at no cost. So, well, yeah, they kind of had to do that, especially because they knew that this sort of thing would be happening a lot. I think they didn't necessarily anticipate how popular the kind of downloadable games or how large the service would necessarily get. Or they did, and it was just a cost-cutting measure, Let's not forget that in most instances, hardware manufacturers take a loss generally on the hardware. And I think that was a whole big thing with the Wii, was that they didn't actually take a loss on the system when they were selling it. So, they have to consider cost-cutting measures and other things themselves, too. So maybe that was part of why, they didn't have so large onboard storage. The flip side to that, though, was that at least they said, okay, well, we'll use a standard memory format, so that if you want to expand that out, go right ahead, go buy these SD cards. They'll work perfectly.
Yes, which was a plus. Speaking of the Virtual Console, incidentally, I don't know if any such information is out yet, but do we know if you're going to be able to transfer your downloaded Virtual Console games onto the Wii U? I would think that Nintendo would have to be working on something. I can't assume that they would pull a Sony.
Well, you can assume whatever you'd like, but who knows?
Well, if you have a option to save your Virtual Console games on your SD card, you can probably plug that into the Wii U.
Okay.
Yeah, it looks like I'm looking at the front of the system, and again, it looks like it's going to have an SD card, an S3 memory card slot. So I would be surprised if it didn't have some kind of support for existing Wii saves. Just as the Wii had support for GameCube, controller slots and memory cards. I feel like if they're going to go with backwards compatibility, they're going to go all the way with backwards compatibility. They're really going to make sure that however you had your game saved, that you'll be able to pretty much just unplug them from your current system and plug them into the new one. That seems to be the kind of thing that they're going to do. There's also this, Nintendo is supposedly rebranding their online what have you, and they're calling something they're calling the Nintendo Network.
Yes,
that is sort of
friend codes.
Thankfully, they're going to apparently get rid of friend codes. So we'll see what kind of comes out of that, and maybe something like the eShop will sort of be expanded and baked into that. But I would really think that it's probably going to be the sort of thing where it's tied into an account that you created, and as a result, anything you downloaded and paid for once, you can download and not have to pay for going forward. I would think. I mean, I obviously don't have any inside information, but that would be my guess.
One of the things I seem to notice is that Nintendo is finally dragging itself into the 21st century with a system capable of HD quality graphics.
Goddamn time.
I kind of get the sense that, I know that Nintendo, they stuck to their guns when they were making the Wii. I mean, they focused a lot more of their emphasis on, trying to make games with good gameplay and, things like that. And graphics were not their primary, focus, as what seems to be the case on, a good chunk of PS3 and 360 titles where graphics wins the day.
To be fair, in some senses they had a point, but that doesn't mean that doesn't excuse them from total lack of support by I feel like there must have been a meeting somewhere where when they were designing the Wii hardware, where they had a high def option, and not to disrespect the man in any way whatsoever, but I feel like if there's anybody that had this influence, it would have been Miyamoto, who said, guys, we have to remember that we want to make sure that our games are fun, not that they look good. So they probably went with the lower cost, wider net approach of lower graphics but the approachable controller, and decided to axe kind of a more photorealistic and approach whatsoever. And now this time around they're saying, okay, we've got our larger audience, we've got the Wii established, let's go for something that's gonna kind of keep the developers happy.
Also keep in mind that when the Wii was initially launched, HD capable TVs were still somewhat cost prohibitive.
Somewhat, but
somewhat. I mean, they weren't, quite as prolific as they are now.
Yeah, but then again, they also kept saying that it'll have a DVD drive, and then it didn't have a DVD drive.
And then it didn't have a DVD drive, yeah.
Because then their argument was the opposite, was how many DVD players do you have in your house? Do you really need another one? And that was also a cost-cutting measure, I mean, yes. I don't think anybody would deny that.
Yes, and, but yes, I kind of talking to some friends about, how the Wii U was going to be HD compatible, and I said, I get the sense that Nintendo saw the tremendous graphical capabilities of the PS3 and 360, and I kind of get the sense that you had Nintendo executives going, oh, all right, fine,
yeah.
fine, we'll boost up our graphics, fine.
I mean, again, if there was anybody that put that kind of pressure on them, it was probably the developers, and it was probably. I mean, they're all. Think about the. Can you? I'm sure you can rattle off a list in your head of games that, you know, oh, you see this game. Oh, it has blood in it. Oh, well, there's not going to be a Nintendo version. Or, I mean,
Yeah.
it looks kind of cool. Yup, there's not going to be a Nintendo version. I mean, there's just such a list of, so many acclaimed games that that, I mean, Nintendo's been funding their own gaming libraries for a while now, just primarily because the third-party support isn't there. I would think a lot of the time because the Wii versions would have to be so radically different, and they're probably honestly a little tired of that. If they're only going to support one of these tablet controllers, you may see mostly first-player only games brought over to the Wii U, but at least you'll probably see some more cross-platforms. I mean, I'm looking at right now, there's a list of supposedly announced Wii U games, and again, I don't know exactly where this is coming from, but just to give you a perfect example, here's a game that I would have never expected to see on a Nintendo system. Supposedly Arkham City, Batman Arkham City is going to be released sometime this year on the Wii U. I mean, would you have realistically thought at any point last year that that's a game that would come over? And, not even just because
Or Assassin's Creed 3.
Or Assassin's Creed 3, Darksiders. I mean, these are games that you'd say, wow, that'd be great to have on the Wii. Ninja Gaiden 3, you didn't expect that to be there because the high def support wasn't there, and you never felt like the third parties were all that interested necessarily in making those kinds of games for the Wii because they didn't think the audience was there.
That's very true. And Ron, I mean, you can also, agree or disagree. I kind of got the sense that, during the Wii's run, and, the Wii's not dead yet, but third-party developers just kind of up and vanished.
Yeah,
it certainly seemed like, the only people who could make a good Wii game was Nintendo.
Yeah, that's and I think that's probably just because people just didn't really wrap their heads around the motion gaming. And by the time they realized that you could have successful games with it, people were kind of more focused on the PS3 and the 360.
Well, yes, there is that. I mean, I know that, the PS3 and the 360 you have a more traditional controller setup. I don't really think that was just the control scheme of the Wii. I don't think that was the sole reason why third-party developers were scared off or didn't want to develop it. I think that Nintendo also probably had, their standards that third parties weren't going to adhere to.
I mean, this has been a story, though, for Nintendo, realistically, probably since the Super Nintendo or the N64 games. I mean, we all know we've all seen the screens of Final Fantasy VII as it was running on the N64, and we all know what happened there. There was a nice decade between Final Fantasy games, and the main franchise still hasn't, come back to Nintendo systems, and I'm not necessarily sure they will. This has been a long-standing issue. Nintendo continually saying we're going to support the hardcore, and their main path to quote supporting the hardcore is releasing games like Twilight Princess, games like Metroid Prime. I mean, they kind of take it upon themselves to make their own major support titles. This has been the story for forever. So that's why I'm genuinely surprised and excited to see this list. Is if this is really happening, that's great. That's really awesome that they are finally at a point where the third parties say, okay, we're going to take this seriously. We're going to port over some of these major titles and see what we can do with them.
And I'm hoping that's the case. I'm really hoping that the third party support comes back.
It's the other one that I don't see on this list, but I feel was at least hinted at or rumored about is Resident Evil 6. That's another title that I think, I would not be surprised to see it on the Wii U, if not necessarily when the 360 and PS3 version launches, but I would be surprised to I wouldn't be surprised to see it pop over to the Wii U if Nintendo's really going to be serious about keeping their hardcore fan base.
I think it might eventually will. I mean, especially if Resident Evil 6 pulls the sort of numbers that Resident Evil 4 did.
Yeah.
Because that's Capcom's cash cow.
Yeah. If Capcom wants to make money, let's assume for the moment that Resident Evil 6 does come out around the same time as the Wii U, Like, why would Capcom not put it on all three consoles?
Exactly. I mean, if it's simpler enough, there's no reason they shouldn't. I mean, the only reason they could, they still need to hire a copy editor at some point. But I definitely think that this would be a good opportunity for Capcom to pad their wallets a little bit.
I would think so.
Capcom loves making money.
I mean, considering that that Resident Evil 6 has a release date at this point of November 20th, should the Wii U be launched around that time, that could be a good launch title, for the Wii U if Capcom decides to go that route.
Sure. I mean, especially with all the potential system exclusive benefits, play it, without being the only TV in the house, or, maybe there's some other kind of support. The only thing I'm concerned about is just that if we get back into waggle controls and, the Sony's experiment with the PlayStation, 6-axis controller, that could definitely lead to some issues.
It could. And, while we're talking about third-party support for the Wii, I have to bring up sort of a devil's advocate point. Nintendo has always been seen as the family-friendly option. You do not find a whole lot of M-rated titles on that. If you have some of these third-party titles, I mean, Assassin's Creed, I'm sure, is an M-rated title.
Resident Evil will be an M-rated title. Arkham City is it's not M, but it's pretty darn close.
Do you think that if you have these potentially M-rated games on a Nintendo system, do you think that might put people off? I mean, that has not been. I mean, the one good M-rated game that Nintendo helped make, Eternal Darkness, you saw where that went.
I mean, I don't know that it would necessarily turn people off. I think it would, if anything, people would just be sort of surprised. I mean, again, in this case, it's like, wait, what? Really? These are coming to a Nintendo console? Are you sure? I mean, that was kind of my impression of the whole thing. But I don't think that it would be the sort of thing where people would be disinterested in buying the console because it has these M-rated titles.
Okay.
I mean, that's my opinion. I don't think that having M-rated titles is going to be a stigma that they'll have to shake. I think if anything, it's not having M-rated titles is the stigma that they sort of have to shake right now, because there is a large contingent of gamers that would probably be at least somewhat interested in picking up the system if it could offer them something different than what they're getting right now from their PlayStation 3s and their 360s. But, that's going to really be the challenge, is what does Nintendo bring to the table that hasn't already been brought to the table? They had their chance. If they had kept up kind of with technically what Microsoft and Sony were doing and had kept the third parties and kept, not necessarily just gone for the family-friendly viewpoint on the console, they wouldn't be in this position right now where it's surprising to see these games on their systems. So these are already gamers that have probably defected in a lot of cases. So the question is now, what are they going to do to bring them back? The loyalists will stay, and those of us who appreciate a more mature approach to gaming are certainly going to be happy with it, but I think to win people back is really going to be the interesting challenge.
I would have to agree with you completely there. Nintendo needs to something new, something fresh, something to try to win over hearts and minds. I mean, I know I'm a Nintendo fanboy through and through, so I'm sure that I will eventually get the system. Maybe not immediately at launch, but probably not too long afterward.
Yeah, I mean, it's again, like I said, the loyalists are going to stay loyal, in most likelihood, because they will have the franchises that they love and are so familiar with. Then they will also be able to be exposed now to, some of these new titles. There was that whole Project Rainfall movement where all those games that were released in Japan and in Europe, but that were not coming to the US, these fans were banding together and trying to get those games released in the US. Well, some of those games were, I've never played anything from this series because I've only ever owned Nintendo consoles, and now you have a game from this series, you're just not going to release it in my country, so what gives? We want to give you money. Why do you not want our money? I think that, like I said, the loyalists are going to stay. The challenge is really just, how do you bring in new fans? What do you do differently?
Yes. And there we go. And, I suspect, that, I have to, really doubt the naysayers who think that, the end times are coming. Nintendo's shot itself in the foot one too many times, as is the case with every new release. They're done, they're over. I think that, as we get closer to E3 and, E3 itself will be the most telling. We'll see what Nintendo's final specifications, price point, what they're going to do with this Wii U. I think we'll have a much better idea of where the system intends to go, what their plans with it are.
Should be interesting.
Should be very interesting. So, any last thoughts on the Wii U before we head to cool moments in video games?
The only concern I have will be the price points for the system. If they can maintain that Nintendo standard of it being a fairly cheap, I think it will be fairly successful out of the gate, barring some horrible thing that they forget to add in, like no games or something like that. But I think it's going to be mostly dependent on Nintendo to make sure they stay true to what they're good at.
Yeah, but I mean, again, we know that their games are going to come out. It's going to be, we're going to have a Mario game, we're going to have a Zelda game, we're probably going to have a Metroid game.
We already have another Smash Brothers game.
We have a Smash Brothers game. We have 2 Smash Brothers games. Talk about transferring, talk about between system play. They said there's going to be some link between 3DS Smash and Wii U Smash. We're going to have Pikmin 3, finally. I mean, it's we know some of what we're going to get. I think just the real question is, what else do we get?
We will find out. I think a lot of this will be hinged on third-party support. I would love to see third parties come back. Yeah.
That would be nice. I mean, looks like Dragon Quest X is going to be there, so Square Enix is a big third party. Again, we talked about Batman. We talked about Darksiders 2, Assassin's Creed. Those are all going to be big, those could all be very big third parties. And you know who's been really talking it up, which is very interesting to me, is Epic Games. The guys behind Gears of War and the Unreal Tournament series. Though they have been apparently talking up the Wii U a lot, and that to me is really interesting because they were, especially around the time of the original Wii, very, very down on the original Wii system. So for them to come out and talk so heavily and so excitedly about the Wii U, one, makes me really interested for what the system is going to be capable of, and two, really makes me think that we're going to see some kind of support from them, some actual product show up. I think it's really kind of interesting how radically their position has shifted from system to system.
Here's hoping, at any rate.
Yeah, I mean, that'd be... I don't think we'll ever see Gears of War, obviously. I'm pretty sure that's going to end up being a system-specific title, but, I think that we're going to see something from them on the Wii U, so... Who knows?
Who knows? All right, we're going to shift into our final segment, which is cool moments in video games. I'm going to edit this part out. Ron has left, obviously. I contributed a cool moment in video games in the last episode, so what I usually do for this segment, Ben, is usually it's provided by somebody on the panel. Somebody throws out a moment in a video game, any video game, that really sticks out, a moment in the game that made the game that much more memorable, that was just, unlike, anything you had seen before, something like that.
Okay.
It could be a scene or a gameplay mechanic, a plot point, whatever. Something that just made a game stick in your head. So for this one, it will be provided by Ben.
I feel like this is probably something that may have been mentioned already. But I don't know if you've played Batman Arkham City. Speaking of Batman Arkham City, I don't know how much of it you've played, if any of it.
I have not played any of it, and that game has not been mentioned yet on the previous episode. So
it's a little bit of a ridiculous moment, but it's just so amazing that I kind of have to bring it up.
All right.
So we all sort of know that Batman has become this like epic, unbelievably godlike figure in pop culture. And we know that sort of there's the spoofy camp version of Batman from the 1960s. The Adam West.
Yes.
The old version. Now down to the very gritty, Christopher Nolan and Christian Bale version, and sort of everything running the gamut in between them. There's a scene in Batman Arkham City where you're dealing with you're basically in an aquatic area, and there's a gigantic shark, a giant mutated shark that's supposed to be supposed to be kind of well, I mean, the idea is you have to traverse this area sort of on blocks of ice, so you have like sort of like the
Okay, I've
ice arrows.
seen this portion of the game. Keep going.
So you know exactly what I'm talking about. So, for those of you who are unfamiliar, if any of you have played Majora's Mask, it's kind of the same idea as the you use ice arrows in that game. In Batman, it's ice grenades to sort of freeze a small section of the water, and then a grappling hook to pull yourself around on it. And they provide the shark as a deterrent to get you to not go into the water. And of course to add an element of sort of scare to it. And eventually there comes a point where the shark sort of jumps out at you, and it really is a giant, oversized, monstrous shark, and you're treated to a very short QuickTime event wherein when you hit a button, all that ends up happening is essentially you as Batman just punch this shark right in the face and knock it right back into the water. And it was just so ridiculous and so epic, and it was such a there's really not a ton of other like fourth wall humor like that in the game, but this was so very clear. They tend to kind of be, for lack of a better phrase, grounded in the rest of the game, where they sort of they try and kind of keep it more realistic and more rooted in whatever reality they want to give you. But for that one moment, it sort of just breaks free from any kind of preconceived notions of what is possible, and it was just a hysterical, amazing moment.
It's a very, very lighthearted moment in an otherwise very serious game.
Exactly, and that's what really makes it such a great, such a cool moment, is that it's so out of tone and so tongue-in-cheek and so ridiculous. They just absolutely, they know 100% what they were doing, and it was just a brilliant execution on their part. So that would be one of my I guess that would be my nomination for cool moment in gaming.
All right. Sounds good. We can add that to the list. We had we have Super Paper Mario on that list. We had Final Fantasy IV. Ron had Mass Effect 2. Then I, in the last episode, had Resident Evil 1, the very first zombie. And
yeah, that's actually kind of a big moment.
And now this one. I never actually did see the shark getting punched in the face.
I'll pull up the video for you.
Please do. I'm sure that I never saw that moment, but I know where in the game you're talking about because I saw April's brother playing that section of the game. Alrighty. So that is going to wrap up our discussion about the Wii U and the Vita. If you have any questions, complaints, comments, what have you, you can reach us at facebook.com/downloadable content or on Twitter at DLContent. You can follow us there. And if you want to, any one of you listening want to come on and record a future episode, then by all means, let me know. You can post at the locations I just told you, and we'll see what we can do. So for Ron and for Ben, I am Brian. We shall see you on the next episode.